DC's got some great museums, but none where you can live out your wildest rock star dreams. Cleveland's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is where legends come alive. You can even jam out with their house band in their interactive musical experience, The Garage. And don't miss their incredible new SNL exhibit, featuring Will Ferrell's famous cowbell and the complete archive of every SNL musical performance ever aired. Check out the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame to learn more about the music that connects us all. Find more info at rockhall.com/exhibitions/SNL-50-years-music. Today on CityCast DC, there's a ton of transportation stuff going on right now. Changes to the bus lines, the Dupont Deckover, the Penn Ave West project, and of course, fights about bike lanes. And today, I'm here with Sharon Kershbaum, DC's Director of the Department of Transportation, or DDOT for short, to answer my questions and yours about the latest. Today's Thursday, July 17th. I'm Bridget Todd, and here's what DC is talking about. Good morning, Director. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate the time.
Happy to be here. Looking forward to this.
And it's a great time to be chatting with you because there is a ton of transportation stuff going on right now. And I'd love to start with the Dupont Deckover. We did an episode about this. It's a project to create a new public plaza over the northern part of Connecticut Avenue Northwest, leading to Dupont Circle. Now, I love a green space. I love a plaza, but this construction is slated to take 27 months, more than 2 years. Why will it take so long to build this?
Well, this is a pretty complex project, and we are incredibly excited about how it will help transform Dupont Circle, which is already an amazing community, and there's high demand for areas to stroll and for plaza space. The good news is we're doing it in stages, and I think that will help with the disruption. So while it is an extensive process and will take more than 2 years, I'm hopeful that people will see some progress. So right now, we're starting on the streetscape element, which is a little farther north of the actual deckover. The deckover goes from the Circle to Q Street, and the streetscape goes all the way up to California. So we can do some of that surface work, and that's going to be improving the sidewalks, improving the lighting. We'll have a fantastic bike lane that will connect from Columbia Road to 20th. So we can do that work while we're preparing for the deckover. And so we'll see progress along the way, and it won't feel like the entire project is shutting down everything for the entire period.
That's good to know. I am a cyclist in the city, so I love when I hear good bike lanes, my ears get percolating. I do know that folks who have written in, they're not just concerned about the changes in traffic for the 27-month construction period, but also there was some public pushback after DDOT released renderings of this project that showed it would remove some of those protected bike lanes and parking. Plus, the detour diverts thousands of cars, trucks, and buses onto side streets. So what do you say to folks who are really concerned, who live in that area, who are like, this is going to cause an uptick in traffic on the side streets?
We have done we've done a number of iterations on our traffic control plan to try to minimize the impacts. The reality is that there will be some diversion, but we have staged it in such a way to try to minimize it. And again, because we're doing this in phases, it's not going to be 27 months across the entire project.
I do want to switch gears a little bit because a lot of folks are talking about the Better Bus Network. We know that they redid all the names. I actually just recently learned what the names mean. And now that I've kind of got it down, I'm like, oh, it does sort of make more sense. Did Metro try to coordinate with you all about these bus routes? And are you trying to road diet or slim lanes? What was the thinking behind these changes?
So this was really a WMATA-driven effort. And as you probably know, they had not upgraded their routing for 50 years.
Which is crazy.
It's crazy. And within 50 years, we have new neighborhoods. We have hospitals that have closed and new hospitals that have opened and just different kinds of hotspots that people need to get to. And another big change that they've incorporated is the fact that this is no longer just about getting people in and out of downtown. We still need to do that, but people live here, they live in our core, and they need to have bus service all day. They need them on the weekends, they need them on the evenings. And so they really kind of shifted sort of where their peak hours were to really normalize it throughout, the every day, weeks, weekends. So I think it is a huge win for the district. Our role was really more in a support function. So they control the bus network, we control the streets. And so as they modified routes, there are oftentimes that there may have been a very skinny turn, and we might need to remove some parking so the buses can get through. They moved a lot of bus shelters and bus stops, so we support that. We often needed to add some bus pads when they have a new spot that didn't have it. So we are making sure that the roadway is ready for the new network. We were supportive in some of their outreach, and we shared information when we got it, but they ultimately were the decision makers.
I do think living in a city like DC, transportation is one of those issues that's always spicy, no matter what side you're coming at it from. I am often accused of having car brain, even though I probably drive like once a month. I bike most places. And I'm curious, we had Mark Fisher on the podcast a while back, and he basically accused DDOT of having an anti-car agenda in an episode that we did about bike lanes. Is there any truth to the idea of road diets slowing down cars purposefully?
So we had a lot of concerns with the Mark Fisher article, and I'm glad that you brought it up. First and foremost, DDOT needs to consider all roadway users, and we do that, and it is a balance, and everything is a trade-off. But we need to consider pedestrians, we need to consider bikers, and there will always be people, whether it's through their cars to get in and out of the city, or even, most importantly, freight. We just need to make sure that a roadway network accommodates all. And so there's been a shift in thinking over the past few years. There used to be a real push for complete streets. And that concept was we need streets to be all things to all users. I believe the reality is the roads just don't have the dimensions and space to be all things to all users. So we're trying to focus on networks. We need to have a complete network for our freight. We need to have a complete network for our transit. We need to have a complete network for our bikes. But those aren't going to be on all roads. And so we have been working on networks. Some of those are farther along than others. We're right now undertaking sort of a bike network to look at what are the key corridors for biking and how can you get from every key node that you need to. But that means that we're not going to have bike lanes on every road. In terms of the criticism that bike lanes create congestion and slow things down, I just think that's a really sort of misunderstood concept. Congestion is created by volume, hard stop. And when you have more cars on the road, things will move slower. And you can look at Los Angeles and Atlanta. They continue to expand their highways and they add more lanes, and they are still congested. So the way you fight congestion and traffic is by providing inviting alternatives, and that is transit to make bus routes more inviting. If you are sitting in a car and you see that the bus is passing you, you will actually think twice about taking the bus as an option. If the bus is going to take you 45 minutes longer to get to work or get to where you need to go, it's not a viable option for many people. And so our focus has been on adding priority bus lanes. We know that those can reduce travel times significantly, and that makes it something that now people will choose to do. And to some extent as well, there are folks who will choose to ride a bike if it is safer. Now, we know there are many residents who are not going to be able to use that as an alternative. So we're realistic about it, and we try to find a balance.
That's a good way to put it. I mean, even as a certified bike person, I'm not one of those people that says everybody can and should be biking. Like if you've got small kids, if you've got mobility issues, if you just don't feel safe on the DC streets, as you said, there are plenty of reasons why someone is not going to choose biking. But if people have more options, that's definitely better for everybody.
Indeed. And I'll tell you, the question about deliberately creating, congestion and making it so unpleasant to drive, like that is not that is not one of our missions or priorities. I do think that we've been able to look at data when we do a road diet and remove a lane, whether that's to have a new priority bus lane or for a bike lane, we have looked at travel times and looked at the difference. And so 16th Street has been a great example where when we added a priority bus lane, we wanted to know what the change in travel times were for vehicles. And we looked at it in 2019 and pre-COVID, in 23 and 24. We've actually found that the travel times for vehicles increased by maybe 50 seconds at peak intervals. So while people perceive that they're moving slower, it's really fairly de minimis. And before we do a road diet, we look at what the impacts will be. And if it is very significant, we'll figure out, are there ways we can mitigate that extra travel time? And is it something that's still worth doing? But I do think there's a perception. And much of the increased volume is really bringing us back to where we were pre-COVID. So people have short-term memory and they think it's worse than ever. And they look to their right and they see a red painted bus lane or they see a bike lane and they say that is causing the problems. And what they don't know is in 2019, the travel times were exactly the same.
I do have a personal question about this. I live on 14th Street, and there are stretches of 14th Street where the bike lanes are just constantly blocked. There's one particular stretch, and if you're a cyclist in DC, you know exactly the stretch I'm talking about. My co-host and I, Mike, have talked about this, but he says, listen, you live in a city. If you're going to be biking in a city, part of the reality of that is that freight needs to get moved around. Trucks have to get stuff into the grocery stores. Bike lanes might be blocked. What do you say to someone like me who is like, not acceptable? This is not an efficient way to get around in the city anymore if bike lanes are going to be consistently blocked.
Bike lanes should not be blocked. I know it's a pain point. And I'm excited to say we have a couple of things that we're doing to try to fix the root cause, which is that freight needs to be able to find a place to park. I think the biggest misconception is that a lot of the interventions that we've built in are the root cause of the problem. So to understand why I'm moving slower, it is because there are more cars on the road. And to fix that problem, I'll tell you, when we do put in new bike lanes, we do spend time looking at the loading situation and trying to find, opportunities on the side streets and change the curbside policies to make it possible. We are looking at a new sort of micro freight pilot that we're going to be starting in the fall. And a couple of other cities are ahead of us on this. And it's the idea of, instead of just having these massive 18-wheelers and large trucks coming from a warehouse in Maryland, driving directly to the mini market that they're dropping things off, we would help work with these micro hubs, which would be locations, whether it's in the public right of way. In the case that we're going to pilot, it'll be on private land and would be sort of a warehouse hub. And instead of having the large trucks go beyond the hub, they go to the hub, they drop off their cargo, and then we would have motorized bicycles pick those up and take them to the final destination. We have a couple of steps we need to do to get there. One is actually changing the legislation that allows vehicles in bike lanes and allowing it for these sort of four-wheeled motorized bicycles with cargo holds to actually be able to go in bike lanes. So we're working on the legislative changes now. We also have another program that we've recently kicked off where we would try to encourage the moped, so the DoorDash and Uber Eats drivers from switching from mopeds and motorcycles into e-bikes. And again, they would be able to use bike lanes. They wouldn't be parking in the middle of a bike lane, and it would reduce all the emissions. And so we're taking the lead from a couple of other cities, but we think there's a lot of potential here.
Got CityCast set to auto-download? Now you're cooking with gas. Wait, cooking with gas is so last century. Not only is an all-electric home cleaner and healthier, but it can save energy and money too. Thanks to the DC SEU, or the DC Sustainable Energy Utility, it's easier and more affordable than ever to electrify. As in, any district resident can get up to $15,000 off upgrades. Income-qualified folks, they can upgrade at no cost. Seriously. And the DC SEU has rebates for the good stuff: heat pumps that warm and cool efficiently, induction stoves that boil water faster than Donna Summer can say, well, hot stuff. Their team can help you update your electric panel, delivering the upgrades that make adding new appliances possible. But hey, the funding won't last. Visit dcseu.com/electric and bust a move on energy-efficient home electrification today.
Join the Library of Congress on July 24th for Ask the Ethicist, a live session with Kwame Anthony Appiah, 2024 recipient of the Kluge Prize and resident New York Times ethics columnist, who helps readers sort through life's sticky situations and moral dilemmas, from crypto and AI to lawn chemicals, pet names, using sick leave to slack off, and yes, politics. The Ethicist seems to have heard it all. In this special interactive event, explore real-world moral dilemmas and cast your vote on what you would do. Then, hear how one of today's most influential public philosophers thinks through the same questions. Thoughtful and engaging, the library invites you to reflect on everyday ethical questions in a way that's personal, relevant, and fun. That's Ask the Ethicist on July 24th at the Library of Congress. Get free tickets at loc.gov/live. You know, something that you've talked about is whether or not folks feel safe on the streets, safe to bike, safe to be pedestrians. And I know that Vision Zero has this goal of 0 fatalities on DC streets. It's been at the forefront of a lot of folks' minds. We've talked about it a lot on the show. And for the most part right now, it seems like it's not really looking great. In fact, there are more traffic deaths than when Vision Zero started. What's going on here?
So, Bridget, I'm glad you asked. And when we talk about traffic fatalities, I'm going to say this, but I'm not going to celebrate it in the way that you might think I would. So, year to date, we've had 10 traffic fatalities. That is compared to 30 last year. So we have had a huge decline, and we are so pleased about that. But I don't celebrate yet because there is so much variability and noise in the fatalities. Now, I do read every single fatality report. And the latest one, it was a stolen vehicle driven by a 17-year-old that didn't have a license, who was on 295 crossing 3 lanes of traffic, spun out. And, and every single fatality is a tragedy. There are very little tools that we have in our toolkit to address the nature of these fatalities, whether it's an impaired driver, whether it is a distracted driver or a reckless driver. The fatalities tend to be based on extreme antisocial behavior, incredibly high speeds, and there is no engineering tool or even, traffic cameras that can solve that problem. And so while we should stay laser focused on it, this is not something that as a transportation department, we can really get down to 0. And so I like to tie how we track our effectiveness based on the actual work we do and where we can have an impact. We remain laser focused on our high injury corridors. So we know that over 50% of the serious crashes and fatalities happen on fewer than 5% of our roadways. So there are very few roadways where these serious crashes are happening. We know where they are, and we are designing, whether it's long-term corridor transformation projects or targeting intersections in the short term. We have been very intentional about targeting our efforts there where they're most needed. And we have probably transformed or have a project in the works at close to 80% of those corridors. So we've got to get to 100%. But we can see when we have something done, we do before and after studies on every one of our projects. Actually, I should say we've been starting to do them. So we haven't finished them. We need to really wait 6 months to a year to kind of look at the effectiveness.
You mentioned that there were specific intersections. I don't want to put you on the spot, but are there any that you know off the top of your head? Like, these are some of the most kind of deadly, serious crash intersections in the city?
Well, one we recently transformed. People talked about it as the Dave Thomas Circle project, but at New York Avenue and Florida Avenue and First, that was a complicated intersection. We had a number of crashes there. It was confusing. I think people would literally drive out of their way to avoid that intersection. We opened that up a few months ago, and we just had a ribbon cutting for it. Recently, when we opened up the plazas, it's actually been transformed into a park, but it is now clear. We have shorter crossing distances. We have a fantastic bike lane. And I used to work at that intersection before I came to DDOT, and it was scary just crossing. Even with a pedestrian signal, you would sort of run and always had to be vigilant. And so I just think that both pedestrians, bikers, and drivers can cross that intersection with great ease. We have a number of other ones that are sort of less famous because we didn't necessarily add parks, but we are targeting those in the same way that we target our high-entry corridors.
I want to transition to another sort of specific area in the city, the Penn Avenue West project, which I've only just recently started to hear about. What is it, and what is the goal with that project?
So it's interesting. Pennsylvania Avenue West, and that is from 17th Street up to 22nd Street, is one of the most sterile corridors we have. It has wide sidewalks, which you think would make it inviting, but it just feels dead right now. And on either end, you've got Foggy Bottom and you've got the GW campus, and there's some restaurants there. And down on 17th Street, you're right near the White House, and it's really an entry to downtown and to a lot of the mall and a really inviting tourist area. But along the way, it is stressful to cross the street. The intersections are just too big. The green space is minimal. And, there have been a couple of parklets that have been created, but we believe there is so much more potential there. There's always been a lot of focus on the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue between the White House and the U.S. Capitol. And there's a bunch of efforts that NCPC and National Park Service are working on. But it's been pretty sleepy and quiet on the Pennsylvania Avenue West side. We've had a great partner in the Golden Triangle bid, and a lot of the vision for this came from their leadership. So that project will be kicking off this month, and it will, I believe, transform this corridor. There will be beautiful green spaces. Instead of having a sort of a small tree box here and there, you're going to have large swaths of greenery. There will be a bike lane, no flex posts. It's going to be sort of a median that's also going to be green and vibrant. And there will be streetscape improvements, including sort of consistent sidewalk materials, upgraded signals and streetlights. And all of the sort of parklets and other sort of smaller spaces are going to sort of be enhanced, both with street furniture. And then there are going to be open spaces for sculpture and art. So I just think it'll be a place where people will come to, as opposed to sort of a corridor people try to get through. And, we're all very excited about more and more residential communities popping up within and around it. And I just think it will be a place that will feel much more like DuPont, where people who live there will want to come and gather.
We got an email from a listener with some questions about this project. She writes, I've been keeping loose tabs on the Penn Avenue West project since 2019 as my bike commute takes me from Capitol Hill to Foggy Bottom along Pennsylvania Avenue. Every morning when I'm biking west on the stretch between the White House and Washington Circle on nearly empty lanes with double parked delivery vehicles and people doing U-turns, I wonder why on earth this project isn't moving forward. And in the afternoon when I'm heading back east, it's a total cluster, with cars racing around me to make the lights at 19th and 17th. I also wonder why on earth this project isn't moving forward and whether someone will be critically injured in the meantime. Do you have any response to this listener who seems frustrated with this area?
Well, your day is here. So this project will be kicking off this summer, and I think that she will love it. And this is going to be her main bike route to get to work in Foggy Bottom. So give us a minute. There are a number of utilities that need to get relocated when we do some of these streetscape projects. So I know people feel frustrated they don't move fast enough. We all feel frustrated that things don't move fast enough, but we have the resources. We have a fantastic contractor lined up to do it. So it's coming, and I believe it'll be worth the wait.
When you're thinking about all of these changes to bike lanes and bus routes and all of this, how do you balance these decisions of like what to change and what to keep the same?
Well, I talked about our high entry corridors. And so, at this point, when we have limited capital budget resources, I have prioritized the safety projects. So the corridors that we're working on, whether it's on recent transformation of Florida Avenue Northeast, whether it's Minnesota Avenue, we are targeting the high entry corridors. So those are roadways that are designed as often mini highways that cut through neighborhoods. A lot of times people will say, hey, we would really like to enhance the livability of our community. Can you do some roadway projects to just make it more inviting and more things that will help, primarily just, with aesthetics. And I said, I hope there's a day and age where that then becomes our priorities, but for now, we need to focus on the safety efforts. Now, Penn West was a long time in the works, so while it's not a high injury corridor, this was a project that had many other sort of drivers behind why we're doing it. And again, it will be more safe for pedestrians, and there's a lot of things that we know will help revitalize downtown. We do work on projects that aren't just safety corridors, but those will continue to be our main priority.
How long will the Penn Avenue West project take?
The Penn Avenue West project, I believe, is also going to be about 2 years. We have really thoughtful traffic management plans in place so that it's not going to be completely shut down. We'll do it in phases, but I think it's going to be about 2 years end to end.
Why do these projects take so long in general? I mean, I know they're complicated. I know they involve a lot of moving pieces, but why do they take so long?
Well, when we do a road diet, we actually do look at what that means for the corridor in terms of queuing, in terms of travel times. So a study itself can take, 6 to 9 months. We then develop concepts and we do work with the community. We do so much engagement. And often at the concept phase is when we talk to the stakeholders who are living along the corridor, the heavy users. And then the design phase, usually sort of a 35%, 65%, 90% design phase, where we also will go back to the community and we'll make sure that this still makes sense. What did we miss? And then when it comes to actual construction, if we have utilities that need to get relocated, oftentimes we'll need to wait, whether it's water, gas, Pepco, Verizon, there's a number of utilities that we don't want them coming back in after we've redone it and repaved it to dig things up. And oftentimes, they've got their construction plans mapped out for the year, and we're saying, we need you to do this on our behalf. And so every step of it, it does take a long time. And I know people probably think that, people here just aren't hustling. I'm not really quite sure how people frame it. But when you peek behind the curtain and see the sausage that goes on behind every single step, these projects are incredibly complex.
You mentioned signals, and that reminded me of another spicy issue we talked about on the show, which is the no turn on red citywide thing. So I'm curious, what is the state of no turn on red citywide? I understand that it's not a super popular rule with the Bowser administration, nor is it super popular with Republicans in Congress. It doesn't seem like it's being actively enforced at every intersection. What's happening with that?
So, and to be clear, our position is and has been that no turn on red, it's not the law of the land. We continue to have signage to indicate when you turn on red. And so there was a council bill, but that never came into effect. So I know that the most dangerous turns at intersection is actually the soft left, not the no turn on red. We are focused on things that we know will help reduce crashes. And so one of those is leading pedestrian intervals. So that means that when you are standing as a pedestrian and trying to cross the intersection, you'll see that the walk sign will come on before the light turns green. So that means that pedestrians and bikers have a little bit of a lead time to get to the middle of an intersection, so that when the light turns green and cars start to go, it's very visible that there's someone in the intersection or a biker in the middle of the intersection. That is a proven way to reduce crashes. We have those built out at, I think, almost every one of our intersections. So we are doing things that we know are the most impactful.
I can't have this conversation with you without asking about DC being DC and us not being a state. We're always worried about congressional interference and what DC is doing. Do you worry about interference from Congress on DC's roadways, whether that's lack of funds or trying to install new traffic laws? Is there anything that you're keeping tabs on in that arena that we should know about?
Yes, I think that interference from Congress is something that I'm focused on. In fact, every agency should be. And as we've learned this really painful fiscal year, there are things that we are somewhat powerless to fight against, including having this sort of artificial, arbitrary budget cut in the middle of our fiscal year. So it's something that we're aware of, and it means that we need to be airtight in our compliance with federal highway standards. And so we make sure that we stay within the guardrails that they've set up, and so it's defensible. And Federal Highway has some discretionary grants that have new requirements, and so when we pursue those grants, we need to be in compliance with those. But I would say we are careful in what we do, but it isn't what directs us. We are laser focused on our safety efforts, on making the city as safe and inviting for transit and for pedestrians and for bikers and for drivers. And so we continue to fulfill our mission, but it would be naive to say that it's not something we need to pay attention to.
It's something that we talk to a lot of city officials about, this sort of tightrope that folks have to walk because DC doesn't have statehood. President Trump has signaled some interest in exerting influence over the way that DC is run. Is this something that you all are keeping an eye on?
Absolutely. And I have to say, I'm really proud of how our mayor has balanced that. And we are thoughtful and intentional when we do things. And she has built a very positive relationship so that we are not dealing with constant incoming fire. And we all are supportive of that and work with the sort of the framework and the nature of the relationship that she set.
My last question, is there anything that you want to leave listeners in DC with? Like, if there's one thing to know about DC's roads, it's this.
Well, one thing that I think isn't actually unique to DC or even to me in my role is that this is a challenge that every city DOT faces. And oftentimes the rancor and passion that people feel about whether it's sort of keep it status quo or, hey, we need to make these changes, it is intense. And there are often sort of underlying tensions within a neighborhood. You've got sort of urbanists that have moved in, and you've got some longtime residents who have been in their house for generations. And for whatever reason, the thing that becomes the lightning rod is whether we're going to build a protected bike lane in the community. And so our teams are often sort of navigating very contentious neighborhood meetings. They listen. They try to balance each side. The reality of how I see my job and how I encourage them to do their job and how the mayor encourages all of her leaders to think about it is, we are not advocates. We are here to deliver services. And so that means that we have to listen to all residents and we have to find that middle of the road sweet spot. It's sad to say, our sweet spot is really everyone's a little unhappy because they sort of get something, they don't lose everything, but that is kind of where we have to operate.
Director Kershbaum, thank you so much for being here. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for your time, Bridget. Really a pleasure. Thank you.
That's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, share it with a transportation nerd in your life. You can rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with even more news from around the city. Talk to you then.